Here is a number for you. 7 shillings and sixpence. That's what you earned this week. 7 shillings and sixpence. And before you picture that as some quaint little sum from a different time, let me tell you what it cost you. It cost you 5 nights standing in the cold until your feet went numb inside your boots. It cost you the kind of smile that stops being real somewhere around the 3rd month of doing this. It cost you your body, your privacy, your sleep schedule, and about 40% of your dignity on any given evening. The other 60% you keep locked somewhere behind your eyes where nobody can reach it, because if you let that go too, you've got nothing left. 7 shillings and sixpence. That's less than a factory girl makes in the same period. Less than a charwoman. Less than a crossing sweeper boy who stands in the rain moving horse dung off the road for halfpenny tips. You are near the bottom of Victorian London's vast and intricate economy, and what makes it complicated, what makes it genuinely strange to think about, is that most people on the street looking at you assume you're somewhere near the top. They assume you're rolling in it. They assume the painted women of the Haymarket are dripping with coin and jewels, and the kind of easy money that comes from not having to work with your back or your hands. They're wrong. Most of them are spectacularly, almost insultingly wrong. So I make these history stories, and I'll be honest with you, I have no idea who's listening to this one at 2 a.m. with their eyes closed. Maybe you're someone who's curious about Victorian social history. Maybe you're a researcher. Maybe you're someone who just found this channel and you clicked on the title without thinking too hard about it. Either way, get comfortable. This one goes places. Subscribe if you want. Here we go. Picture a London street in November of 1862. Not the postcard London, not the gaslit romance of it. The fog curling prettily around hansom cabs, the gentlemen in top hats with their walking sticks. I mean the real November street, which smells of horse dung and coal smoke and the particular damp rot of a city that's been built too fast on top of itself. The mud is not mud exactly. It's a compound of horse urine and clay and ash and things you don't want to identify too closely, and it's 6 inches deep in places, and it splashes up your skirts when a cab goes past too fast. The fog isn't romantic, it's sulphurous. It burns the back of your throat. It makes the gas lamps look like they're drowning. Now put a woman on that street, not a girl, though she's only 19. She stopped being a girl around the time she left Wiltshire with £3 in her pocket and a letter from her employer that turned out to be worth nothing because the position had already been filled by the time she arrived. That was 14 months ago. She's been on the Haymarket for 11 of those 14 months. Her name is Eliza Marsh. She's standing at the corner of Coventry Street and Haymarket in a dress she keeps as clean as she can manage, which is difficult when you live in a 2-shilling-a-week room above a gin shop in 7 Dials. The dress is green taffeta. It rustles when she moves, which is the point. In the hierarchy of the night streets, the quality of your dress sends a message before you've said a single word. Green taffeta says, I have some standards. Green taffeta with mud 6 inches up the hem says, but not too many. It says, I am accessible. Come talk to me. It's 9:30 on a Tuesday. She's been on this corner since 8 o'clock. So far, she has earned nothing, and she needs 1 shilling and 4pence by tomorrow morning, or Mrs. Hannigan is going to put her things in the street. This is where we begin. Not with waking up in a warm bed, not with a gradual introduction to the world. We begin at the sharp edge of necessity, where a woman stands in the cold and calculates what she needs and what she has, and the gap between those 2 numbers that she has to close before dawn. This is the arithmetic of Victorian street life. It has nothing romantic in it. It is just math. Just the cold math of survival on the least forgiving streets in the most powerful city in the world. Let me tell you what she actually earns. Let's do the full week. Because that's the point of this story. That's the thing nobody tells you when they talk about the painted ladies of the Haymarket, like they were some sort of glamorous subspecies of Victorian womanhood. Let's follow Eliza through 7 days and nights, and let's count every coin. But first, you need to understand where she fits. Because there's a hierarchy here, and it matters enormously. The distance between the top of this particular world and the bottom of it is the distance between a duchess and a beggar, and Eliza is somewhere in the anxious middle, aware of how far she could still fall. At the very top you have what the Victorians called the kept mistress. Not a streetwalker at all, technically. A woman who has secured one wealthy man, or possibly two, who pays her rent and her dressmaker's bills and takes her to supper at places where you need a reservation and the menu doesn't have prices on it. She lives in a nice set of rooms in Mayfair or Kensington. She has a maid, possibly two. She sees perhaps 3 or 4 men a year. She is, by the standards of her world, comfortable. Some of them end up marrying their keepers. Some of them retire at 28 with enough money to buy a shop or a lodging house and disappear into respectability. They are the success stories, and because they are the success stories, everyone talks about them, and everyone who arrives on the streets of London with no money and no options tells herself that she might become one. Most of them don't. Below the kept mistress, you have what contemporary observers called the prima donna of the streets, the women of the Haymarket proper, the ones in the expensive dresses who frequent the Argyle rooms and the night houses around Piccadilly. These women are not kept by any single man. They're independent operators. They work the best streets. They charge the most. They have standards about who they'll go with and what they'll do. They might earn 15 to 20 shillings a night on a good night. They might earn nothing on a bad one. They pay high rent for their respectable rooms and high prices for their dresses and their bonnets, because appearances are capital in this world. If you look expensive, men assume you are and they pay accordingly. These women are not rich, but they're surviving, and surviving well, and they know the rules and they play the game expertly. Then there's Eliza's level, the middle market, the Haymarket adjacent, the women who aren't in the prime spots, who can't afford the Argyle rooms, who dress as well as they can on limited funds and work the surrounding streets and try to catch what falls off the edges of the better trade. She's been here 11 months. She knows most of the women she sees every night by name or by sight. She knows which corners are claimed by whom. She knows which night houses will let you sit in the warmth for an hour if you buy a cup of coffee. She knows which policemen take payment to look the other way and which ones are actually trying to do their jobs and will move her along without warning. And below her, further down, are the women she tries not to think about. The ones in the darkest alleys. The ones who'll take a shilling. The ones who are drunk before midnight because it's the only way they can do it. The ones who are sick. The ones who've been doing this for 10 years and look 45 when they're 28. This is where she could end up. This is what she works every night to prevent. 7 shillings and 6pence. That's the week's total. Let's see where it comes from, and let's see where it goes. Monday begins not with an alarm clock, because alarm clocks are a middle-class luxury, but with the sound of Mrs. Hannigan's footsteps on the landing at 7:30 in the morning, which is Mrs. Hannigan's way of reminding you that rent is due on Thursdays and that it's now Monday, and you should be thinking about it. The footsteps pause outside your door. You hear her breathe through her nose, which she does when she's being silently meaningful. Then she moves on. You're lying on a single bed in a room that's 10 feet by 9 feet. You know the exact dimensions because you paced them out when you first moved in. The way you do when a room is small enough that its exact size starts to feel important. There's a washstand with a basin and a pitcher. There's a small fireplace that hasn't been lit since Thursday because coal is 3p a scuttle, and you needed those 3p for something else. The window faces the alley at the back, and in the morning it shows you a rectangle of grey London sky and the roof of the gin shop opposite, with its green copper guttering going black at the edges. You're wearing your shift and a pair of wool stockings because the room is cold, and you can see your breath when you exhale. The cold isn't painful yet, it's just present, the way bad news is present before you fully register it, sitting in the room with you, patient. You made 8p last night, which is to say, you made 8p on Sunday, the worst night of the week by general agreement. Sunday is when respectable men stay home with their families and go to church and remember their obligations to God and society. And the men who don't stay home are usually the ones you'd rather not deal with. The ones who are aggressive or too drunk or who want to argue about price in a way that tells you the argument isn't really about price. 8p. You have it in a small cloth purse that you keep pinned to the inside of your stays, right against your ribs, because any money left visible in a room like this one tends to vanish. You've lost money to other tenants twice. You've lost a pair of good stockings to someone who came through the window. You've learned that in 7 Dials, which is not the worst neighbourhood in London but is not the best. Everything you own must be defended, or it isn't really yours. 8p from Sunday. Rent due Thursday is 2 shillings. 2 shillings is 24p. You need 16 more pence by Thursday just to stay in this room, and that doesn't count food, and that doesn't count coal, and that doesn't count the 6p you promised to the woman on the ground floor who lent it to you last week. You get up. The floorboards are cold under your feet through the wool stockings. Not cold the way a cold floor is when you're warm and comfortable and could go back to bed, but cold the way a floor is when the whole room is cold, when the temperature has been against you all night, when your body has been working all night just to stay warm and hasn't quite managed it. You go to the washstand. The water in the pitcher is cold too. You pour a small amount into the basin, the least amount you can manage and still call it washing, and you wash your hands and face and the back of your neck. The water feels like a mild punishment. You do it anyway, because cleanliness is professional currency. It's part of what you sell. The green taffeta dress is hanging on the hook behind the door. You hung it there last night when you came in, carefully, with the particular care you give to the things you absolutely cannot afford to replace. The dress cost 14 shillings when you bought it from the second-hand stall on Monmouth Street 6 months ago. It was someone else's dress before that, someone who wore it for something you'll never know about, a party maybe, or a wedding. It's slightly too big in the waist, which you've managed with a tuck you can't see unless you look very hard, and the hem has been taken up twice. But the colour is still good. A deep bottle green that catches the gaslight well, and the taffeta still has its sound, that particular rustling, sliding sound that well-dressed women make when they move, and so you treat it like the investment it is. You put on your other dress first, a plain brown wool thing, high-necked, unremarkable. This is your day dress, or more accurately your room dress, the one you wear when you're not working, when you're buying bread or collecting water or sitting by Mrs. Hannigan's downstairs fire. which she occasionally permits if you've been regular with rent. The brown dress is not a thing of beauty. The brown dress is pure function. But it lets you keep the green taffeta clean, and the green taffeta is how you make money. So the brown dress is, in a way, the most important garment you own. You eat what you have, which this morning is a heel of bread, and the last scrapings from a pot of dripping, which is the rendered fat from whatever roasting joint someone was cooking last week. You bought it at the chandler's for a halfpenny. Taste of mutton and salt and austerity. You eat it standing up at the washstand because there is no table in the room, and the bed is where you sleep, not where you eat. Because you've drawn some lines, and this is one of them. The bread and dripping is not enough to constitute a meal by any reasonable definition, but it is what there is. Your stomach acknowledges this with a kind of resigned grumble, and then goes quiet. It's Monday. Monday's a working night. Every night is a working night when you're Eliza Marsh. But Monday in particular is when the previous week's hopeless tally starts over, and you have 5 days before the hopeless tally of the new week comes due. Monday has a certain grim energy to it. Monday you go out early and you work until late, and you tell yourself that this week will be better than last week. Because if you stop telling yourself that, the whole enterprise becomes impossible to sustain. Before you go out, you spend 20 minutes on your face and hair. This is not vanity, or it's not only vanity, this is marketing. You have a small pot of rouge that you use carefully, the lightest touch on the lips and cheeks, because the aim is not to look rouged. The aim is to look as though you don't need rouge, to look warm and alive in weather that makes everyone look pale and raw. You have a pot of Rowland's Macassar oil for your hair, a luxury you justify because hair is visible from 20 feet away, and rouge is only visible up close, and first impressions happen at 20 feet. You do your hair in the style you've seen in the illustrated papers, dressed up at the back with a few curls left loose at the temples, and you pin it with the 3 hairpins you still have, having lost 6 of the original 9 to the mysterious gravitational pull that seems to operate only on hairpins and single gloves. You look at yourself in the small mirror above the washstand, the one that's slightly warped at the lower left corner so your chin looks subtly wrong if you examine it too closely. You look, and you assess, and you decide that you will do. You're not beautiful, not in the classical sense, not in the way the illustrated papers mean when they use that word. You have a good complexion, which is valuable, and dark eyes, and an expressive face that can do a version of warmth that reads as genuine even when it isn't. These are what you have. You put on the green taffeta dress, button it up, smooth it down, check the hem. Put on your good bonnet, the black silk one with the white ribbon slightly crushed on one side where you slept on it once in a moment of absolute exhaustion. It doesn't show in the dark. You put on your gloves. One finger has a small split at the seam. You've mended it twice. A third mending is possible, but the thread shows, and so you fold that finger under when someone might be looking at your hands, which they sometimes are. Because hands tell stories about work and class and how a woman spends her days. You go downstairs and out into Monday morning in 7 dials, and you walk to Covent Garden Market to see if there's anything to eat that isn't too expensive, and on the way you pass 3 other women in similar states of preparatory mourning, and you nod to 2 of them because you know them, and you look away from the third because she's from the part of the street you don't want to think about, the falling down part. And there's a superstition in this, though you wouldn't admit it, a fear that proximity to worse luck will transfer it. The market is loud with the morning trade, the vendors still unloading their carts, The smell of wet vegetables and horse dung and something floral underneath it all. The cut stems of flowers that have been brought in from the market garden south of the river. You can buy a single orange for a halfpenny, or half a dozen wilting chrysanthemums for the same. You buy the orange. You eat it walking back, peeling it with your thumbnail, and the smell of it cuts through everything else for a moment, sharp and sweet and almost violent in its cleanness, and you think for just a second of Wiltshire in summer, of the orchard behind the house you worked in, of a world that is entirely gone now and will not come back. Right. Now, let's talk about Monday night. The Haymarket district in the 1860s is not a single street, though there is a street called the Haymarket, which runs from Pall Mall up to Piccadilly, and on which there are theatres and oyster bars and a dozen other establishments that exist in the comfortable grey zone between respectable and not. But when people say the Haymarket, they mean a whole geography, a whole ecosystem of nighttime commerce that spreads from Regent Street to Trafalgar Square, from the Strand up through Soho, with the densest concentration of everything happening in the blocks around Coventry Street and Piccadilly. By the time you take your position at 8:30, you've already done the calculations. You need to clear at least 2 shillings tonight, ideally 3 if you want to eat tomorrow and put something toward Thursday's rent. 2 shillings means 2 clients at the going rate of a shilling each, which is the absolute minimum any woman of your level will accept, or 1 at 2 shillings, which happens less often than you'd like. 3 shillings means something more, and 3 shillings seems possible on a Monday, when men are out with the particular restlessness of the new week, when they haven't yet settled into the habits of the week and are still looking for diversion. The corner of Coventry and Haymarket is not your preferred spot. Your preferred spot is 30 yards further north, closer to the lights of the theatre and the better class of restaurant, where the men coming out after 8 o'clock have usually had a good dinner and are in the comfortable expansiveness that follows a good dinner. But that corner is taken by Maggie Farrell, who has been on these streets 3 years longer than you, and who has the territorial instincts of a much larger animal. You don't argue with Maggie. You take your second choice corner and you make it work. Standing on a corner in November in London in 1862 is not comfortable. The fog has thickened over the course of the day and now sits around the gas lamps like a bad idea, softening their light into something amber and diffuse, casting long shadows between the pools of illumination. The cold comes up from the pavement through the soles of your boots, which are beginning to go thin at the heel. You can feel the cobblestones through them when the pavement is uneven. You shift your weight from foot to foot, not obviously, not in a way that telegraphs discomfort, because a woman who looks uncomfortable looks like she doesn't want to be there, and a woman who looks like she doesn't want to be there is harder to approach. You look like you're exactly where you choose to be. A policeman walks past. This is Constable Marsh, no relation, who works this beat on Monday and Wednesday evenings. He looks at you. You look at him. Some kind of silent transaction occurs. He walks on. In some precincts, the women pay regular sums to the constables for this studied non-observation. In this particular stretch, Constable Marsh has a more complicated arrangement that involves him reporting to a sergeant who doesn't care very much, and so the practical outcome is that you can stand on your corner without being moved along, provided you're not creating a disturbance. You've never created a disturbance. You've seen women create disturbances and watched what happens, and what happens is a night in the Vine Street lockup and a morning before the magistrate, and a fine you can't pay, and either more time in the lockup or a form of debt to someone who'll pay the fine and then own the debt, which is a trap with no comfortable exits. You've been careful. Careful is how you've survived 11 months where some of the women you arrived with haven't. The first man to speak to you on Monday evening is not a client. He's a journalist, or so he says. He's been sent by one of the illustrated papers to write a piece about the night streets of London, which is a piece that gets written approximately every 6 months by some newspaper or another, because the night streets of London represent a seemingly inexhaustible source of moral anxiety for the reading public, who simultaneously disapprove of the whole business and can't stop reading about it. He's young, 23 perhaps, with ink on his fingers and an earnest expression and a notebook that he keeps half concealed in his coat, which is a technique that fools nobody. "Might I ask you a few questions?" he says. "That depends," you say, "on what you're offering for the answers." He blinks. He was not expecting this to be a commercial transaction. That is, I'm merely hoping to understand. I'm working," you say pleasantly. "If you want to talk to me, you can pay for my time, or you can go talk to someone who isn't." He goes slightly red in the gaslight. He reaches into his coat and produces a sixpence, which he holds out with the slightly pained expression of a man who's been forced to confront a principle he hadn't quite formulated. You take the sixpence. Now you're at sixpence for the evening. What do you want to know? He wants to know what you earn. He wants to know where you come from. He wants to know how you ended up here. These are the standard questions. Every journalist who comes to the Haymarket asks the same questions, and every woman on the Haymarket has a standard set of answers, calibrated to be interesting enough to satisfy the journalist and empty enough to give nothing real away. You tell him you came from the country, which is true. You tell him you found London difficult, which is an understatement. You tell him what you charge, which you do straightforwardly because it seems to be what he's genuinely looking for and because the honesty surprises him, and you'd rather he remember you as honest than as evasive. You don't tell him your name, your real name. You tell him Eliza, which is your real name actually, but you tell it in a tone that suggests it might not be, which gives you deniability. He asks, "Is it terrible?" This is the question they always think is the revealing one, and it's actually the least revealing, because the answer is complicated in a way that doesn't fit into a newspaper column. "It's cold tonight," you tell him instead, "and I need to get back to work." He thanks you and retreats, and you watch him go, notebook in hand, and you think about the article he'll write, which will describe the women of the Haymarket as either tragic fallen creatures or as brazen hussies, depending on which emotional note the editor wants to strike. And either way it won't be accurate, because accuracy takes more space than a newspaper column allows. Sixpence, and it's 9 o'clock. The street has its rhythms, and you know them after 11 months the way a musician knows a piece they've played hundreds of times. Around 9, the theatres are in their second act, and the streets are relatively quiet. The men who are going to be out tonight are already out, already settled into restaurants or gaming rooms or the theatre itself. The men who come out around 9:30, 10 o'clock, are the ones who've had an early dinner and are looking for what comes after. 11 to 1 in the morning is the peak, when the theatres let out and the supper rooms fill up, and the whole district achieves a particular velocity of money and movement and noise. This Monday evening, the peak works in your favour. At 10, a man comes to stand near your corner in the way that means he's interested but not quite ready to speak, orbiting your position like a moon that hasn't fully committed to a planet. He's middle-aged, 40 perhaps, well-dressed but not ostentatiously, a dark coat, a good hat, clean-shaved. He has the particular furtive energy of a man who has done this before, but still hasn't made his peace with it. You don't pursue him. This is a thing you learned in the first month. The women who pursue too eagerly get the worst clients. The women who stand their ground and let the client make the approach get clients who've made a decision, which means they're less likely to change their mind at an inconvenient moment or become aggressive when they're surprised by the reality of the situation. You stay where you are. You look at the street. You make it very easy for him to approach without approaching him. He approaches. The conversation is brief. There is a price discussed, which is 1 shilling and 6pence, which is above your floor price, and reflects that his clothes suggest he can afford it. There is location agreed upon, which is the room you keep for this purpose. A different room from where you sleep. A room you rent by the week from a woman called Mrs. O'Brien, who lives on Rupert Street, and who has been in various related businesses for 30 years, and who operates with the brisk discretion of someone who has made their peace with what the world requires. The room costs you 2 shillings a week. It has a bed and a washstand and a candle and a lock on the door. That's all it needs to have. This transaction takes approximately 20 minutes. You're back on your corner by 10:25. 1 shilling and 6pence plus the journalist's 6pence. You're at 2 shillings for the evening. 2 shillings means rent for 1 day and a loaf of bread. It's not enough. You need more. The night continues. The temperature drops. The fog thickens. Around 11, the Argyle rooms let out a crowd of a different quality, louder and more various. Young men with the bright eyes of too much champagne, couples, groups, individuals. This is the wave that either makes your evening or doesn't. You smile at a man who passes. He slows, turns back. 90 minutes later, that's another shilling. 3 shillings for Monday. 3 shillings and 6pence, including the journalist's money, which you're counting separately in your head as found money because it didn't cost you the same kind of effort. You walk home at 1 in the morning. Your feet hurt. Not the romantic ache of tired feet after dancing, but the specific grinding soreness of feet that have been cold and standing for 4 hours on stone pavement. Your lower back aches with it too, the particular ache of standing still for long periods, which is actually harder on the body than walking. You know a woman, Mary Flynn, who developed a problem with her spine after years of this kind of work, and she now can't stand for more than half an hour at a stretch, which is a disaster in this occupation, and a disaster generally. You think about Mary Flynn sometimes, the way you think about all the things that could go wrong. Not with pleasure, not with morbid fascination. You think about them with the clinical attention of someone who is trying to avoid them. Home, cold room. You bank the 4 pennies worth of coal you'd been saving and you light the fire just for 20 minutes, enough to take the worst of the cold off the air. You sit on the bed with your hands wrapped around a tin cup of hot water, which is what you drink when you have no tea, and you count your money. 3 shillings and 6pence for a Monday. The coal runs out. You get into bed with all your clothes on except the taffeta dress, which you've hung carefully on its hook, and you lie there listening to 7 dials at 1 in the morning, which is not quiet. There's a man shouting somewhere below. There's a woman singing in the gin shop next door, not a good singer, but a persistent one. There's the distant sound of a cart on cobblestones. Your feet are still cold. You go to sleep. Tuesday is when the economics start to make themselves known in detail, and Tuesday is when we need to talk about the full cost structure of this occupation, because the 7 shillings and 6pence that Eliza earns in a week is not 7 shillings and 6pence that she gets to keep. Not remotely. Let me break this down, because this is the part that nobody talks about when they talk about the women of the Haymarket. Everyone focuses on what they earn. Nobody focuses on what they spend. The room at Mrs. Hannigan's is 2 shillings a week. This is her sleeping room, her private room, the one in 7 dials with the warped mirror and the 10 by 9 dimensions. She pays this regardless of what she earns, which means that 2 shillings comes off the top of every week's income before she's bought a single thing to eat. The room on Rupert Street, Mrs. O'Brien's room, is another 2 shillings a week. This is the working room. She doesn't use it every night, but she pays the weekly rate because that's how Mrs. O'Brien operates, and because having a fixed address for this purpose is safer than the alternatives, which include alleyways and the rooms of strangers and other arrangements that have a history of going wrong. So that's 4 shillings a week in rent, before food, before coal, before anything else. 4 shillings out of 7 shillings and 6pence. She has 3 shillings and 6pence left for everything else. Food, if she's careful, costs her about 1.5 shillings a week. Not good food, not varied food. Bread, dripping, occasionally a penny's worth of soup from one of the street vendors, occasionally a piece of salt fish or a heel of cheese. She eats once a day, sometimes twice if it's been a good night. She hasn't had meat, actual meat, since a dinner she was taken to by a client 3 weeks ago. A dinner at a chop house in Soho, where she ate a mutton cutlet and 3 boiled potatoes and a piece of bread pudding, and felt, for approximately 45 minutes, like a person who lived in a different kind of world. Coal, 6pence a week if she's careful, which she is. The room is cold, but not dangerously cold. Cold enough to be miserable, not cold enough to kill her. Candles, 2pence. Soap. She buys the cheapest Windsor soap, a small cake of it, and makes it last 3 weeks by using it sparingly. Call it 1/2 penny a week. Her dress maintenance. The green taffeta needs cleaning about once a month. She does this herself with a cloth dampened with cold tea, which works for surface marks, and with chalk for the worst stains, and occasionally she pays 1/2 penny to the woman downstairs who has an iron to press out the creases. Say 4pence a week averaged out. Hairpins, thread, small repairs to her clothes, 2pence a week. The woman on the ground floor, the 6pence she borrowed. She'll pay this back this week, 6pence. A one-time cost, but a real one. Add it up. 4 shillings in rent, 18pence in food, 6pence in coal, 2pence in candles, 1/2 penny in soap, 4pence in dress maintenance, 2pence in sundries, 6pence one-time loan repayment. That's approximately 7 shillings and 2pence and 1/2 penny in expenses, against 7 shillings and 6pence in earnings. She has, at the end of a full working week, roughly 3pence and 1/2 penny to her name, assuming everything goes exactly right, assuming no unexpected costs, assuming no illness, no bad nights, no damaged dress that needs replacement, no boots that finally give up, assuming nothing goes wrong, in a world where things go wrong constantly and creatively. Now you understand why the math is the way it is. Now you understand why the woman who appears to the Victorian public as a creature of excess and easy money is, in fact, running a deficit operation that requires constant vigilance to keep from collapsing entirely. Now you understand why 3 bad nights can cascade into a crisis. Why 1 shilling spent on something unnecessary can mean going without food. Why the women who've been doing this for years often look the way they do. Not from excess, but from the opposite. From the grinding arithmetic of not quite enough. Tuesday night. Eliza is back on her corner. She's been thinking all day about a conversation she had last week with a woman called Alice, who works the area around the Strand, and who has been on the streets for 7 years, and who told her something Eliza has been turning over in her mind ever since. Alice said, "The ones who get out are the ones who save something. Not much. 1 shilling here, 6pence there." She said, You have to treat it like a business. You have to act like a merchant. You have to keep your accounts. Alice has £3 saved. £3 accumulated over 7 years in sixpences and shillings, kept in a tin behind a loose brick in her wall. £3 is enough to rent a room in a better neighbourhood and take in sewing. £3 is not much, not by the standards of the world, but in Alice's world, £3 is a lifeboat. Eliza has 8p saved. She's saved it since Sunday, which is to say she was able to save it because the journalist paid her in addition to what she was making anyway. And so there was a surplus, for once. 8p, not £3, not a lifeboat, more like a life ring, and a small one. She's decided to save at least 6p a week, every week, no matter what. This is Alice's advice operationalised. This is the long game, which requires playing the short game well enough not to have to think about it all the time. But Tuesday night is not a good night. The fog is worse. Not just thick, but actively unpleasant. The kind of November fog that coats the back of your throat with the taste of sulphur and coal. The kind that makes the gas lamps utterly useless. Their light absorbed into the grey-yellow murk before it travels more than 10 feet. The streets are quieter than Monday. The weather has kept people home, or at least driven them indoors to the warmer venues, the theatres and supper rooms and gin palaces, rather than out onto the street where the cold comes at you from every direction simultaneously. You stand at your corner. You stamp your feet. You can't feel your toes inside your boots. The boots are the thin-soled ones, and the damp has come through. Cold, wet feet. You're aware of every cobblestone through the soles. An hour passes. A man approaches. The conversation goes badly. He wants to pay 9p, which is below your floor, and when you say so, he becomes unpleasant in a specific way that you've learned to recognise, the way men become when they feel entitled to something they're being refused. He calls you a name. You say nothing. He walks off. You watch him go with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that showing a reaction is more dangerous than not having one. 9p. He offered 9p for a human being's time and labour in a November fog, and he called you a name when you declined. This is Tuesday in London in 1862. Your back is aching. Your feet are wet and cold. The fog smells of the city's accumulated burning, a million fireplaces all exhaling at once, the entire metabolic output of a metropolis of 3 million people expressed as weather. Another half hour. Nothing. Then, at 11, a group of young men comes past, 4 of them, returning from somewhere with the loose, generous energy of people who've had a good evening. One of them separates from the group, walks toward you. He's young, maybe 22, and he has the scrubbed pink look of someone from a good family who has recently been taught how to drink. He's polite, he's nervous, he almost certainly shouldn't be here and knows it. The negotiation is brief. 1 shilling, which he agrees to immediately, which tells you he would have paid more. But you didn't know that at the time, and you needed the certainty of a quick agreement more than you needed the additional 6p that might not have materialised. 1 shilling. Tuesday, total, 1 shilling. Plus the 8p carried over from Sunday that you're saving. But from tonight's work, 1 shilling. 1 shilling for 4 hours of cold and wet feet, and a man calling you a name. Wednesday is the turn. Wednesday evening the fog clears, and the temperature drops further, which is actually better because a cold, clear night brings people onto the streets in a different spirit than a foggy, cold night. Cold and clear is bracing. Cold and foggy is miserable. People who are braced spend money. People who are miserable go home. you've done something different on Wednesday. You've borrowed a small posy of flowers from the flower girl who works the corner of Piccadilly, a girl named Nan who is 12 years old and who's been selling flowers since she was 9 and who has the business instincts of a 40-year-old merchant banker. Nan sells you 3 violets for a halfpenny, which is almost certainly more than the market rate. But Nan has a monopoly on this corner and knows it. The violets go in your buttonhole. Small thing. But small things matter at this level. A woman with flowers in her buttonhole looks different from a woman without flowers. She looks like she made a choice that morning. A small choice in favour of beauty. And choices like that signal a kind of self-possession that is paradoxically attractive. It says, I have some standards about how I present myself. It says, I am worth the violets. 2 clients on Wednesday. One at a shilling, one at 1 and 6pence, the second because he was a regular client of one of the higher level women who usually works this area. But she'd been unwell, and you were there, and you'd pitched yourself at 1 and 6 with a confidence you didn't entirely feel, and it worked. 2 and 6pence on Wednesday. That's 4 shillings and 6pence by the end of Wednesday. Thursday is rent day. Thursday you pay Mrs. Hannigan her 2 shillings, and you pay a shilling toward Mrs. O'Brien's room. The other shilling comes at the end of the week when you've had a chance to accumulate it. Thursday afternoon, before the evening starts, you walk to the baker's on Neal Street and you buy a penny loaf, and you buy a halfpenny's worth of butter from the dairy counter, and you go back to your room and you eat bread and butter sitting on your bed in the brown dress, and it tastes extraordinary. Not because it's good food, which it is, ordinary food, but because you bought it with money you earned, and the bread and the butter together cost you 3 halfpence, which is less than you've spent on food in a day in quite a while, and the math, for once, feels like it's working in your direction. Thursday evening, you're on the corner at 8:30. A woman you know slightly, Agnes, comes to stand near you. Agnes has been on the streets 2 years and is in the process of trying to get off them, not by saving like Alice, but by securing a man, a specific man, a printer's assistant she met 3 months ago who shows signs of seriousness. Agnes is oscillating between this man and the street, testing which one will hold her, and on Thursday nights she comes out partly for money and partly for the comfort of familiar company, because the uncertainty of her situation is making her lonely in a specific way. He said he'd come Sunday, Agnes says, to take me to church. That's a good sign, you say. Or he's just religious. Doesn't have to be one or the other. Agnes is quiet for a moment. She has a particular quality of stillness, Agnes, that you've always found unexpectedly restful, as if the city turns down its volume slightly in her vicinity. How's the week? She asks. Better than last week. Mine too. I think it's the cold drives them out. This is a theory Agnes has. That extreme weather, either very cold or very hot, increases business, because people are uncomfortable and looking for comfort. She might be right. You've never tested it scientifically, but Thursday night seems to confirm it. 4 clients, bringing your Thursday earnings to 3 shillings and 4pence. 3 shillings and 4pence on Thursday, after paying rent. Wait, let's stop here and think about Thursday, specifically about what 4 clients in one evening actually means, because this is the part of Victorian social history that gets politely elided in the literature. 4 clients means 4 sets of negotiations, 4 different people, 4 different rooms, 4 trips to Rupert Street and back, 4 separate exercises in the maintenance of a professional face, while doing something that by any reasonable psychological standard requires a private face. It means approximately 3 hours of working time in the room on Rupert Street, plus an hour of waiting and negotiating and walking. It means arriving back at your corner 4 times in the cold, each time a little more tired, each time requiring a little more of the internal resource that you have a limited supply of and that doesn't replenish overnight. And it means, afterward, walking home in the early hours with a specific kind of tiredness that is not just physical, that is something else, something harder to describe, a flatness, a particular emptiness that you fill up with sleep, and then with the morning routine, and then with the small disciplines of the day, and which you don't allow to be named because naming it would require looking at it, and looking at it would make it harder to continue. This is what the economic analysis doesn't capture. This is what the shillings and pence leave out. But the shillings and pence are also real. They're also what stands between you and the street. Both things are true simultaneously. You hold both of them as you walk home through 7 dials at 2 in the morning, and you don't resolve the contradiction because there's nothing to resolve. It's just what it is. Friday. Friday's interesting. On Friday afternoon, before the evening starts, you make a decision. You've heard from a woman called Dora, who works near Regent Street and who is a reliable source of information about the geography of the trade, that a new supper room has opened on Panton Street just off the Haymarket, one of the night houses where the proprietor, a man called Mr. Renton, is known to operate with a particular kind of open-door policy, which is to say he allows women to come in and sit and have a cup of coffee and be available to be spoken to by his gentlemen customers, in exchange for which the women are expected to encourage the purchase of food and drink. It's not the best arrangement in the world, it's not independence, and Renton takes a shilling from any arrangement that's made on his premises. But on a cold night, it means being inside, it means warmth, it means not standing on a wet corner stamping your feet. You decide to try it. The supper room on Panton Street is called the Continental. This is an aspirational name, since there is nothing particularly continental about it except the mirrors behind the bar, which are genuinely French, brought over from Paris in 1858, and which give the whole place a doubled, multiplied quality, as if there are twice as many people in it as there actually are. The room is warm. This is the first thing you notice. It is warm with coal fires at either end and with the body heat of approximately 40 people eating and drinking. And after 4 evenings of standing in the November cold, the warmth hits you with a physical force, like walking into someone's arms. Mr. Renton is a compact, observant man of about 50, with the quality of someone who misses nothing and responds to very little. He looks at you when you come in, looks at your dress, nods, and that's all. You're admitted. You take a table near the middle of the room, close enough to the fire to benefit from it, far enough from the bar that you're not monopolising space without spending money. You order a cup of coffee. It costs 2p. It is very hot and slightly too strong and tastes of chicory and ambition, which is to say it tastes like everything in London that's trying to be something grander than it is. You hold the cup in both hands and feel the warmth move through your palms and up your wrists and into your arms, and you think, this 2p is an investment. The investment pays off at about 10:30, when a man comes in alone and sits at the table next to yours, and there is a conversation, and there is an arrangement, and Mr. Renton gets his shilling out of it, and you come away with 1 shilling and 6p, which is better than you might have done in the cold, though not by a vast margin. But you are warm. You sat in a warm room for 2 hours. You drank coffee. You watched the mirrors multiply the room. You talked to a man who was, in this particular instance, not unpleasant. These things have a value that doesn't appear in the economic analysis. but that are nonetheless real. Friday total, 1 shilling and 6pence minus 2pence for the coffee minus Mr. Renton's shilling. That's 2pence clear from the Continental. It's not much. But you are warm. You go back out to the corner for the rest of the evening and you make another shilling, doing it the old way, in the cold. 2 and 2pence on Friday. Let's update the week's total. Monday, 3 shillings and 6pence, including the journalist's 6pence. Let's count it. Tuesday, 1 shilling. Wednesday, 2 shillings and 6pence. Thursday, 3 shillings and 4pence. Friday, 2 shillings and 2pence. That's 12 shillings and 6pence. Wait. I've been tracking wrong. Let me be honest here. I've been giving you Eliza's good week, which is not actually her typical week. Let me revise. A good week for Eliza looks like 12 shillings. A typical week is closer to 7 or 8. A bad week is 4 or 5. What shifts the numbers? Weather primarily. Cold and clear versus cold and wet. The state of the theatre district, which varies with the season and with whatever is currently running at the Haymarket Theatre and the other venues nearby. Her own health, because nothing kills earning potential faster than a cold or a stomach ailment, and she works outdoors in November, and colds are not optional. The random distribution of what the night brings. So let's make this a typical week, not a good one. Let's make it 7 shillings and 6pence. That means the total expenses I calculated earlier, around 7 shillings and 2pence, eat almost everything. She's left with roughly 3 to 4pence at the end of a typical week. 3pence, 4pence, to put toward next week's unexpected costs. To put in the tin that Alice described, the slow accumulation of an exit. This is the arithmetic of the Haymarket. Not glamour, not excess. Arithmetic. But we're only at Friday. Saturday is Saturday, which is a whole different thing. Saturday night is the big night. Everyone knows this. Every woman on the streets knows it. It's the night with the most traffic and the most money, and also the most danger. Because Saturday night London is a louder and more unpredictable London than Monday or Tuesday London. Saturday is when the factory workers get paid. Saturday is when the clerks have finished their week. Saturday is when a whole class of men who've been deferring their pleasures all week come out all at once with money in their pockets and the specific energy of deferred gratification. Saturday is also when the worst things happen. Saturday is when the drunken arguments turn physical, when a man who seemed reasonable at 10 o'clock becomes unreasonable at midnight. Saturday is when you are most careful. Saturday is when you remember everything you know about reading people quickly, about getting out of a situation before it becomes a problem. You've had one bad experience. 1 in 11 months, which by the standards of this occupation is doing well, is doing carefully and luckily, and with the constant vigilance that stands in for luck when luck runs out. The bad experience was in April, a man who seemed perfectly reasonable and who was not, and the details of it are not something you revisit in your conscious mind if you can help it. What you took from it, practically, operationally, is a set of rules you now follow without exception. You never go to a location you haven't seen before. You never go anywhere that doesn't have a clear exit. You always let the woman in the next room know where you are, which is an informal mutual protection system that a group of you have worked out over time, a kind of network of knowing, where someone always knows where someone else is and will raise an alarm if they don't return. These rules didn't prevent what happened in April, but they prevented it from being worse. Saturday evening, you're at your corner at 8:30, which is earlier than your usual start because on Saturday earlier is better. The foot traffic picks up earlier on Saturday. The theatre crowd is out earlier. The money is moving earlier. The cold is less punishing tonight. Still cold, clearly November, but dry and still, and the sky above the gas lamps is actually visible. A dark London sky with no moon, but with the faint suggestion of stars above the coal smoke, which feels almost miraculous after 4 days of fog. You've done something to your dress. You've added a small sprig of artificial holly at the collar, purchased for a halfpenny from the haberdashery stall in the market this morning. It's a small touch. Christmas is coming. You can feel it in the increased velocity of the shops, the decorations appearing in some of the better establishments, the holly and ivy going up. The holly at your collar is a kind of participation in the season. It says, I am not outside the human world. I am part of it. I mark its occasions. Also, it's red against the green taffeta, and the combination looks well in gaslight. You've tested this in the mirror. The first client on Saturday comes at 9:15. You make 1 shilling and 6pence. The second at 10:45. A shilling. Then the night gets complicated. Because at 11, a man approaches who is not a client. He is, or presents himself as, a reformer. One of the people from the Society for the Rescue of Young Women and Children, which is one of several organisations that spend their Saturday nights on the Haymarket, attempting to persuade women like you to enter one of their rescue homes, where you will receive religious instruction and training in domestic service, and an opportunity for moral reformation. You've met these people before. They come in pairs usually, a man and a woman, with pamphlets and expressions of earnest concern, and they believe genuinely in what they're doing, which makes them simultaneously more sympathetic and more difficult than people who don't believe in anything. This man is on his own, which is unusual. He's middle-aged, with spectacles and a kind face, and the kind of coat that says, I work in a profession that pays respectably, but not extravagantly. Perhaps a school teacher or a clergyman of a modest congregation. Good evening, he says. Good evening, you say. You? That is, I was hoping to speak with you about your circumstances, if you'd permit it. I work with a home in Bloomsbury, and we've had some success in helping young women find alternative... I appreciate it, you say, which is not entirely true, but is not entirely false either. I'm working. I understand. I only wanted to say that if you ever... He pauses, as if he's working out how to say the thing he actually wants to say. I only wanted to say that I've been coming out on these streets for 12 years, he says finally. And I know that most women here don't want to be rescued, and I know I can't force anything. But I have seen women turn their lives around completely, with a little help. And I've seen others who couldn't, for all kinds of reasons, and I've been thinking lately that we don't listen enough. We come out here with our pamphlets and we tell you what we think you need, and we don't ask. He looks at you with the kind of directness that is unusual in these encounters. What do you need? He asks. Actually need, not what the society thinks you need. What would actually make your life better? It's a surprisingly good question. You think about it for longer than you intend to. Money, you say finally. Specifically, enough of it that the math starts working in my favour instead of against me. He nods slowly. You've tried savings banks? Twice. They require a minimum deposit I haven't been able to maintain. And the first time I opened an account I had to close it within 6 weeks because I needed the money for an emergency. What kind of emergency? Boots, you say. My boots wore through entirely, and I had to replace them or I couldn't work. He writes something in a small notebook, nods again. I'm going to remember that, he says. I'm going to tell the society. We talk a great deal about moral reform and very little about the cost of boots. He gives you a card with the address of the home in Bloomsbury. You put it in your pocket. Not because you plan to go there, necessarily, but because the conversation was different from the usual version of this conversation, and you want to keep some evidence of that. He raises his hat and moves on to the next corner. You think about the conversation for the rest of the night. You think about what you'd actually need, in practical terms, for the math to work differently. Not £3, not immediately, but something. Something that shifts the balance. Not rescue, just a different arithmetic. The evening continues. You make another shilling at midnight, 1:30, 2 more shillings in quick succession, when a large group from a private party breaks up and scatters into the Haymarket in various states of revelry. Saturday total, 5 shillings and 6pence. 5 shillings and 6pence on Saturday. That brings the week to approximately what I said earlier, approximately 7 shillings and 6pence when you average across the whole week, though this particular Saturday has lifted this week above average. Sunday is when you count. Sunday morning in 7 dials, in the 10-by-9 room, with the warped mirror and the cold fireplace. You lay your coins out on the bed. You count them. You sort them by denomination. Pennies, halfpennies, 3-penny bits, 6pences, shillings. You do the arithmetic. Earnings this week, somewhere in a range of 10 shillings, counting Saturday's good night. Better than typical. Better than the 7 and 6pence that is the rough average. Expenses paid. 2 shillings to Mrs. Hannigan, 2 shillings to Mrs. O'Brien, the 6pence to the woman downstairs. Food, coal, candles, sundries. You're left with, this week, approximately 2 shillings and 3pence after all expenses. 2 shillings and 3pence. This is a good week. This is what a good week looks like. You put 1 shilling aside in the small cloth purse that you're going to try to keep, to add to the 8pence you've been saving. You've been saving, if you count this week's addition to the 8pence, 17pence now. Not £3, not a lifeboat, 17pence. But more than you had last week. And now let's pull back, because that's what Sunday morning allows, a pulling back, a looking at the wider picture, and what you see when you look at the wider picture is that you're 19 years old and you've been on the Haymarket for 11 months, and you're not dead, and you're not in the workhouse, and you're not at the bottom of the hierarchy, and you have 17pence saved. These are achievements. You know they don't sound like achievements. You know that by the standards of the world they grew up in, by the standards of the Wiltshire orchard and the farmer's daughter you were 5 years ago, they're failures of a comprehensive kind. You know your mother would, if she knew, be devastated in a way that would be genuine and absolute and not performative at all, because she's not that kind of woman. But your mother is in Wiltshire and you're in London, and the distance between those two places is not just geographic. Sunday afternoon, you do something you rarely do. You go for a walk, not a working walk, a civilian walk, a human walk, a walk without a purpose except the walk itself. You put on the brown dress and the slightly crushed bonnet, and you walk south from 7 dials toward the Strand, and then east along the Strand until you get to Waterloo Bridge. Waterloo Bridge. Let's take a moment here. Waterloo Bridge is, in 1862, a relatively new bridge, opened in 1817, 45 years ago, and it is considered by many people the most beautiful bridge in London. It's wide and flat and made of granite, with 9 arches and a straightforward elegance that doesn't try too hard, doesn't ornament itself into incomprehensibility. It's a bridge that knows what it's for and does it well. The toll to cross is a halfpenny. You pay it. You step onto the bridge. The river is grey-brown today, the colour of pewter, moving with the particular quiet purpose that the Thames has on a Sunday morning, when the river traffic is reduced and the water does what it does when nobody is demanding anything of it. You can see downstream to London Bridge, upstream to Hungerford Bridge, and on the far bank the jumbled rooftops of Lambeth, which is where the south bank of London begins, a different geography from the north, flatter and more industrial, with the smells of the vinegar works and the shot tower and the sawmills coming across on the west wind. You stand on the bridge for 20 minutes. This is the elevated perspective. This is the place from which the city becomes legible in a way that it never is from street level. From street level, London is a series of immediate problems. This corner, this man, this negotiation, this cold, this rent, these boots, this week's arithmetic. From the middle of Waterloo Bridge, London is something else. It's a scale, a comprehensiveness. It's the accumulated ambition and desperation and commerce and art and squalor of 3 million people spread out along both banks of a river that was old when the Romans came. You can see St. Paul's from here. The dome, Wren's dome, is visible above the northern skyline. Its lead-covered dome greyed with a decade's weather, but still unmistakably present. Still the largest thing in the central city's sky. It's been there since 1710, which is to say it's been there for 152 years, which is to say it was there before your great-great-grandparents were born, and it will almost certainly be there long after anyone alive today has gone. There's something settling about this, something that doesn't comfort exactly but contextualizes. The city is older than you. It will outlast you. Your week of 7 shillings and sixpence, your 17 pence saved, your green taffeta dress and the warped mirror and the aching feet. All of this is happening inside a larger thing, a thing with its own duration and momentum. You think about the clergyman with the spectacles. You think about what you said. Money. Specifically enough of it that the math starts working in my favour. You think about Alice and her £3 behind the loose brick. You think about Agnes and the printer's assistant who wants to take her to church. You think about what a different life would require and what it wouldn't require, and which of those requirements you might actually be able to meet. The river moves. A coal barge passes below. The bargeman standing at the stern with his long pole, navigating with an easiness that suggests he's done this 10,000 times. Above him, the gulls wheel and call with a particular urgency of gulls, which are always acting as if something is about to happen. Maybe something is. You've been on the Haymarket for 11 months. In the first months you told yourself you'd be out in 6 months. Then in the first year, then when you had £1 saved, then when you had 2. The goalposts moved because the arithmetic made them move, because every time you thought you were getting ahead, something happened. The boots, the illness, the emergency and the savings went back to nothing. But 17 pence is 17 pence. It's real. The wind off the river is cold. You've been standing long enough that your feet are starting to ache again, even in the brown dress, even with no professional requirements. Your body has developed a kind of hair trigger for standing still in the cold, an immediate complaint that registers within minutes rather than hours. You turn and walk back across the bridge, pay the halfpenny toll on the south side, note that you've spent a full penny on this walk and have exactly 2 hours before you need to start thinking about the evening, and you go home. On the way home you pass a print shop on the Strand. In the window there's an engraving. large format printed on good paper that shows a scene from the night streets of London. Artistic rendition. Women in the lamplight, men in top hats. The Haymarket scene as seen by someone who was looking at it from the outside. The women in the engraving are beautiful and tragic and slightly damp looking. Their expressions composed into attitudes of sensuous melancholy. You look at this for a moment, then you look at yourself in the shop window superimposed over it. Brown wool dress, slightly crushed bonnet, sensible shoes, cold chapped face. A very ordinary-looking 19-year-old woman on a Sunday afternoon walk. The two images don't quite align. The week continues, or rather the week is over, and the next week begins, because that's what weeks do, and the next week has its own arithmetic. But before we follow Eliza into the next week, let's take stock of the wider world she's moving through, because this is Henry's history for sleep, and the wider world matters. Victorian London in 1862 is a city in a particular moment of its history, a moment of enormous self-confidence and enormous contradiction. A city that is simultaneously the centre of a global empire and a place where a significant portion of its population is living in conditions that would, by any humane standard, be described as a crisis. It's the year of the Great Exhibition's legacy still reverberating through the culture. It's the year that Charles Dickens is in the middle of his career, actively writing about the poor and the dispossessed in ways that the reading public find thrillingly uncomfortable. It's a year when parliamentary reports on the conditions of the labouring poor are being published and discussed, when reformers are agitating for changes in everything from housing to sanitation to the rights of women. The city is aware of its own contradictions in a way that earlier decades were not, and this awareness hasn't yet translated into solutions, but it's creating a kind of pressure, a simmering recognition that the way things are is not the way things have to be. Within this wider context, the women of the Haymarket occupy a strange position. They're visible, strikingly visible, more visible than most poor women, who are largely invisible to the public eye. They're visible because they're on the streets at hours when respectable women aren't, because they dress to be seen, because their entire professional existence depends on being noticed. This visibility means they attract attention, journalistic attention, reformist attention, parliamentary attention. Henry Mayhew, whose London Labour and the London Poor is being published in the 1850s and early 1860s, interviewed dozens of women like Eliza and published their accounts, which are some of the most remarkable primary sources we have for this period, because they give you, in the women's own words, the actual texture of these lives. And what Mayhew found, and what the parliamentary reports found, and what the Rescue Society workers found when they started listening instead of just preaching, was what Eliza could have told anyone who asked. The math, the grinding, implacable math of not quite enough, the arithmetic that keeps a woman on the street not because she lacks virtue or intelligence or the desire for a different life, but because the particular arrangement of costs and revenues makes exit nearly impossible without external intervention of some kind. This is not unique to the Haymarket. This is Victorian London's fundamental economic logic applied to its most exposed population. The same logic applied to factory girls, to seamstresses, to the crossing sweepers and the mudlarks. The same arithmetic of not enough. What makes Eliza's situation different, or at least more visible, is that the nature of her work means people think they understand it when they don't, means people bring to it all kinds of assumptions and projections that have nothing to do with the actual lived experience. The actual lived experience is, Cold feet and a warped mirror and 17 pence saved in a cloth purse. The actual lived experience is a week's work for 7 shillings and 6pence, most of which is spent before you've earned it. The actual lived experience is standing on Waterloo Bridge on a Sunday afternoon and thinking about the math. Monday of the second week begins the same as Monday of the first week. The church bells somewhere, the cold room, the basin with cold water, the brown dress, the orange if there's money for it, the careful preparation of the green taffeta, the walk to the corner, the calculation. But something's different this Monday, and it takes you a while to identify what it is. It's the beginning of December. You've been doing this for 12 months now, not 11, and the fact of a year is different from the fact of 11 months. A year is a thing with a shape to it. You can look back across it and see it whole. See where you were a year ago. That terrible first month. The absolute terror and bewilderment of it. The crying in the room in 7 Dials that you don't think about. The near complete lack of skills that you've since accumulated. The knowledge you didn't have that you now have so completely that it seems impossible you didn't always know it. A year. And you're still here. And you have 17 pence more than you had a year ago, which is not nothing, which is in fact a kind of success if you squint at it from the right angle. The corner of Coventry and Haymarket at 8:30 in early December is different from the same corner in November. The shops are decorating. There's a smell of roasting chestnuts from the vendor on the corner of Regent Street. A smell that is one of the few genuinely pleasant smells of winter in London. Warm and slightly sweet and uncomplicated. The cold is sharper, the kind of December cold that comes with intention, that means business. That is not the tentative cold of autumn, but the committed cold of a winter that has fully arrived. The holly in your buttonhole is new, replaced twice since Friday. Halfpenny each time. Investment. Agnes is not at her usual corner tonight. The corner is empty. You wonder about the printer's assistant. You wonder if Sunday church happened. Maggie Farrell passes, nods. You nod back. Maggie has been on these streets 6 years and has the settled authority of someone who has made a peace. Not a complete peace, but a working peace, with where they are and what they do. You respect Maggie without exactly admiring her, because Maggie's peace has cost her something you can see in the set of her face, a kind of flattening that happens when the internal accommodation has been made and sealed over. You're trying not to make that accommodation yet. You're trying to hold open a window into a different calculation, the one Alice described, the one with the tin and the loose brick and the slow accumulation of exit money. But holding that window open requires a level of not quite surrendering, a level of still believing in the window's existence that gets harder to maintain on cold Monday evenings in December, when the week starts over and the math reasserts itself. A man comes to your corner. You do what you do. You earn what you earn. The night continues. Here is something nobody talks about. The learning curve. 11 months, now 12, of this work has taught you things that have nothing to do with the work specifically, and everything to do with reading people. You have developed, by sheer volume of practice, an ability to assess a stranger within the first 30 seconds of an encounter that is frankly remarkable. You read posture, gait, the way a man's eyes move, whether he's making eye contact or avoiding it, the quality of his voice, whether he's speaking to you or performing speaking to you, whether the negotiation is genuinely about price or whether the negotiation is a performance of something else, whether he's drunk, whether his drunk is the expansive, cheerful kind or the compressed, unpredictable kind. This skill is not transferable, not directly. You can't put it on a reference letter. You can't describe it in an interview for a position as a lady's companion or a seamstress or a factory hand. But it is real. It is a genuine expertise, developed through practice and necessity, and it is part of what has kept you physically safe for 12 months in an environment that has not been safe for everyone around you. There is a woman you knew, briefly, in the first months. Her name was Catherine. She was 22, from Manchester, had been on the streets 8 months when you met her. Catherine had a quality of bravado that you recognised even then as something different from confidence, something that was covering a much greater uncertainty. She didn't read people well. She took risks you didn't take. In February she was taken up by the police after a complaint from a client, and she spent 3 days in the Vine Street lockup, and when she came out she was different. More careful, but also more desperate, and sometimes those two things work in opposite directions. You lost track of Catherine around April. You heard something about her in June that you hope wasn't true and that you didn't verify, because verification would have required looking at the worst-case scenario of what this work can become, and you need to not look at that in any detail to keep going. Catherine is one of the weights you carry. But you also carry Agnes who might be going to church on Sunday, Agnes who is doing the same calculation you're doing, trying to find a way to a different arithmetic, and who is further along in the finding of it than you are. These are both true. Catastrophe is possible. Exit is also possible. You are, in this specific moment in December 1862, suspended between the two possibilities, and the suspension is what you live in. On a Thursday in the second week of December, something happens that is not dramatic in any way, but that stays with you. You're on your corner at 9 in the evening. It's cold enough to see your breath. The street is busy. The pre-Christmas energy palpable even here, even at the edges of the night economy. Shoppers moving in larger groups than usual. Men with parcels under their arms. A young woman stops near you. Not a client, clearly. She's perhaps 17, in a dress that's too thin for the weather, a country dress, unequipped for London cold. She has a carpet bag. She's looking up and down the street with the specific expression of someone who's just arrived somewhere and hasn't yet processed what they've arrived into. You know that expression. You had it once. You should leave her alone. She's not your business. You have your corner and your economics and your 17 pence and your own calculations. You go over to her. First time in London, you say? She looks at you. Her eyes are raw from the cold. She nods. Where are you trying to get to? She names an address in Holborn, an employment agency, one of the ones that advertises in the provincial papers. You know this agency. It's legitimate mostly. Sometimes the positions it advertises are legitimate. Sometimes they are not. Come back tomorrow morning, you tell her. These places are closed now. You need somewhere to sleep tonight. You tell her about the women's shelter in Drury Lane, which charges a penny a night and is clean and safe and run by people who are not trying to exploit her. You tell her to keep her bag close. You tell her that if anyone offers her money tonight for any reason, she should say no, thank you, and keep walking. She's listening to you with an intensity that is partly gratitude and partly fear. And you remember being that age and looking like that, and having no idea what you were walking into. It gets easier, you say, and you mean it as generically as possible, as advice for London in any capacity, not as advice for this specific world, not as an invitation. Thank you, she says, and she goes. You watch her go until she's absorbed by the street. Then you turn back to your corner. You've lost 15 minutes. 15 minutes in which you might have made a shilling. You don't regret the 15 minutes, but you note them. You file them in the account of things that cost you something but that you do again. This is the week's geography. This is the texture of days that don't appear in the official record, in the parliamentary reports or the society pamphlets, or the illustrated newspaper articles. The cold and the economics and the learning and the human moments that happen inside the framework of the economics and that the framework doesn't account for. The 17 pence in the cloth purse. The clergyman's notebook. The girl with the carpet bag and the country dress. The weekends on Sunday, as all weeks do. And let's take Sunday seriously. Let's follow the actual Sunday of a woman who has been working the Haymarket for 12 months, because Sunday is a different country. Sunday morning, no Mrs. Hannigan's footsteps on the landing. She doesn't come until Monday. You have the whole morning in the quiet of the room, and the quiet is the first gift. You sleep until 9. 9 o'clock, which is the latest you've slept in a week. And the sleep has the quality of sleep that knows it has permission to continue. A deeper, less guarded sleep than the sleep of working nights. You wake slowly, in stages, the way you used to wake as a child before you had to be anywhere. The room is cold. You don't immediately get up. You lie there for a while with a thin blanket pulled up, and you look at the ceiling, which has a water stain in the shape of something you can't quite identify, and you think about nothing in particular, or rather you think about many things without urgency, which is the closest you get to thinking about nothing. You think about Wiltshire. You think about your mother, who is a practical woman and would, if she knew, be devastated, but would also, once the devastation had passed, ask practical questions. What's the plan? That's what she'd ask. Not as a rebuke, but genuinely. What's the plan? The plan, at this particular Sunday in December 1862, is save a shilling a week when possible, 6pence when not. Keep the green taffeta in good condition. Stay away from the worst situations. Pay rent on time. Don't get sick if you can help it, and you can't always help it, but try. And in the longer term that's harder to see clearly, £3 behind a loose brick, or what £3 leads to, the different arithmetic. It's not much of a plan, but it's a plan. It's the outline of intent in a situation that makes intent difficult, and intent is where everything starts. You get up, you wash your face, you eat the bread and the dripping, you put on the brown dress. Sunday, you don't work. This is a rule you've made. Not for moral reasons, not because Sunday is the Sabbath and you're particularly religious, though you say your prayers privately and in your own way that doesn't look like praying from the outside. Sunday you don't work because you need one day that belongs to something other than the economics. One day in which you are not calculating, not performing, not standing in the cold. One day that belongs to whoever you are when you're not doing the job. You walk. You go to Covent Garden, which is beautiful on Sunday mornings in December. The flower market already doing a different trade. Wreaths and holly and little bunches of dried flowers for Christmas. The smell of greenery is overwhelming in the cold air, sharp and clean, sap and pine resin, and the sweetness of hyacinths forced early. You buy a small bunch of dried lavender for a halfpenny, which is an indulgence, and you hold it all the way home and smell it intermittently. The smell of something dried and preserved. Summer made permanent. On the way home you pass a church, one of the small wren churches that are scattered through the city and its edges, their spires visible above the rooftops in the way that makes the skyline of London look like a forest seen from a distance. The door is open. You can hear organ music, Sunday morning service in progress. You stand outside for a while, not going in, not quite, listening. The organ is playing something you half recognise, something from a childhood of Sunday mornings in a different church, in a different county, in a different version of your life. The music doesn't ask anything of you. It just exists, spreading out through the open door into the cold street, into the ordinary Sunday morning, into the lavender you're holding and the cold and the arithmetic and the 17 pence and the green taffeta and the warped mirror and everything else. You listen for a few minutes. Then you walk home. This is the week. 7 shillings and 6pence, more or less. This is what Victorian London's night streets actually cost a woman who worked them. This is the texture of it. The cold and the counting and the small rebellions of Sunday morning lavender. The way you hold on to yourself inside the economics. The way the economics don't quite get all of you. Henry Mayhew published his interviews with women like Eliza in the early 1860s, and what strikes you, reading them now, is not the misery in them, though the misery is real and present, but the voice in them. The women who spoke to Mayhew had voices of extraordinary vividness. They were not victims in the way the Victorian rescue literature would have them be, passive objects of compassion and horror. They were people who had thought about their situations with clarity and intelligence, and who, when someone asked real questions and listened to the real answers, had real things to say. What they said, over and over, in different words and from different starting points, was the arithmetic, the cold math, the distance between what they earned and what they needed, and how small that distance was and how hard it was to close it. Some of them got out. Some found men who married them. Some saved enough for a shop or a lodging house. Some found work in the expanding service industries of the city, as shop girls in the new department stores, as waitresses, as laundresses with their own businesses. Some didn't get out, or got out later, or got out differently than they'd planned, in ways that were harder. Some didn't get out at all. Eliza, the specific Eliza of this story, she's not a real person, she's a composite, built from Mayhew's interviews and parliamentary reports, and the records of the rescue societies and the broader texture of Victorian street life. But her arithmetic is real. Her 17 pence is real. Her green taffeta dress and the warped mirror and the boots going thin at the heel are all real, drawn from the actual testimony of the actual women who spoke about their lives in the 1860s, and her plan is real too. The attempt at a plan. The shilling a week when possible, the 6pence when not. The long game that requires playing the short game well enough to survive. Now let's follow her into the evenings of December, because December is where the story finds its particular texture, where the city and the season and the economics converge into something that illuminates the rest. The weeks in December have their own rhythm. The run-up to Christmas accelerates everything. The shops are fuller, the streets are louder, the money is moving faster and in larger quantities, and some of that money finds its way to the corners of Coventry and Haymarket, men who are flush with year-end bonuses, or who have just completed a good deal, or who are in the expansive pre-Christmas mood that the season manufactures in those who can afford to be expansive. December's first 3 weeks are good weeks, not spectacular, not the 12 shillings of the exceptional Saturday, but consistent. 9 shillings, 8 and 6, 10 shillings one particularly good week. The expenses don't decrease, the rent doesn't go down for Christmas, the coal costs the same per scuttle. The food, if anything, is slightly more expensive because the market gardeners know that everyone is buying extra for the holiday period. But the income is higher and the gap between income and expenses, that 3 to 4 pence weekly surplus, grows. Not much, but measurably. By the 3rd week of December, Eliza's cloth purse contains 2 shillings and a penny. 2 shillings and a penny. This is not nothing. This is the most she's had saved in 12 months. She doesn't spend it on Christmas, though the instinct to spend it is there. The pull of the season, the smell of roasting chestnuts, and the sight of the shop windows full of things that are not for her. The particular ache of a festive season observed from the outside. She doesn't spend it. She puts it in the purse and she leaves it there. Christmas Day is a strange day on the Haymarket. Strange because it's quiet. Strange because the city, even this part of the city, even this corner of the city's economy, observes the holiday. Not completely, not universally, but enough. The streets are almost peaceful on Christmas morning, the usual roar of the city reduced to something closer to a murmur. The church bells ring from every direction at once. You don't work on Christmas Day, or rather, you go out for a walk in the brown dress, and the walk goes past Mrs. O'Brien's building on Rupert Street, and Mrs. O'Brien is outside sweeping her front step, which she does every morning regardless of the occasion, and she nods at you, and you nod back, and then you walk on. There's a dinner at the Shelter in Drury Lane on Christmas Day for women who have nowhere to go. A charitable dinner, organised by the same kind of people who come out on Saturday nights with pamphlets and earnest expressions. You've been avoiding these dinners for 12 months because they require being classified, require admitting to a category of need that feels more exposing than the need itself. This year, you go. The dinner is soup and bread and a piece of beef and a slice of plum pudding, and there are approximately 40 women in the long room, and it is warm, warmly heated. The kind of warmth that feels like a gift after months of cold rooms and cold corners. The soup is thick and heavily salted and hot, and when you eat it, the heat spreads through your chest with the particular comfort of being fed something warm when you've been cold for a long time. You sit next to a woman who introduces herself as Margaret. Margaret is 31 and has been on the street since she was 20, and she talks about this with the matter-of-fact directness of someone who has made their comprehensive peace. She runs a small group of women now, which is a euphemism for something more complicated, but the practical outcome of which is that she has a slightly better income and a slightly larger room and a slightly more stable version of the same arithmetic. She's not what the Rescue Society would call a success story. She's what Alice would call managing. Margaret asks you how long. You tell her 12 months. She nods. The first year's the test, she says. If you're still yourself after the first year, you've got a chance. Still yourself? You know what I mean. You do. You think you do. The thing you've been trying not to let close, the window into a different arithmetic, the part of you that is still Eliza Marsh from Wiltshire, who liked the smell of the orchard, and who had plans that did not look like this. I think I'm still myself, you say. Mostly. Margaret looks at you with the assessing gaze of someone who's seen a lot of women lose and keep various things about themselves, and after a moment she nods. Good, she says. Keep that. After the dinner you walk home through Christmas Day London, which is quieter than any other day of the year, the great machinery of the city having agreed for once to pause. The streets are not empty, not entirely, but the quality of movement is different, slower, more purposeful, people going to places they want to go rather than places they have to be. You go home, you sit in your room, you take out the cloth purse and count the 2 shillings and a penny. You add a penny from the day's walked change. 2 shillings and 2 pence. You put the purse back. You look out the window at the alley and the black copper guttering of the gin shop opposite, and the grey London sky beginning to darken toward the early evening of a December afternoon. The city hums, even now, even on Christmas Day. You can feel it through the walls and floor, the distant sound of a carriage, a door opening and closing, the cold settling into the stones of the building, the cold that's been in London longer than the buildings, longer than the streets, longer than the name of the city. You think about next year, not in a grand or ambitious way, just practically. Just, what does next week look like? What does next month look like? What does next year's cloth purse look like if you save 6 pence a week without fail? 6 pence a week for 52 weeks is 26 shillings, £1 and 6 pence. Not £3, but it's in the direction of £3. It's more than you have now. It's movement, which is what you need. The window into the different arithmetic, you push it a little further open. There's something Henry Mayhew wrote in one of his interviews about a woman who had been on the streets for several years and who described the experience with the phrase, "I was in it before I knew I was in it." She meant the way the circumstances accumulated, the way each individual choice that led to the next choice seemed rational at the time, seemed like the only available option, and it was only in retrospect that the shape of it became visible, the way you'd taken a certain path and the path had narrowed behind you as you walked. Eliza is aware of this. She's been aware of it since about the 3rd month, when the immediacy of the first month's survival had passed, and she had enough breathing room to look back at the path and see its shape. She's aware that she took it step by step and that some of the steps felt like choices, and some of them felt like the only option, and some of them felt like both simultaneously, which is the most honest way to describe it. She's also aware that awareness alone doesn't change the arithmetic. That being a clear-eyed person in difficult circumstances doesn't make the circumstances easier. That knowing exactly how you got somewhere doesn't automatically show you the way out, but it does help. Or she tells herself it helps. She tells herself that the window she's keeping open is keeping open because she sees it clearly, and that seeing it clearly is the first condition of going through it eventually. The evening of Christmas Day passes. It gets dark. The gas lamps come on in the alley, their yellow light fuzzing in the cold air. You don't go out. You read, or you try to, a newspaper someone left behind at the Continental, folded and refolded until the paper is soft as cloth. The news is about the American War, which has been going on since last year, and about parliamentary business, and about a ship that was lost in the North Atlantic with all hands, and about a new exhibition at the South Kensington Museum. You read about the exhibition with particular attention, not because you'll go, because you won't, but because you're interested in what it contains, which is a collection of scientific instruments and examples of applied science that sound, from the newspaper description, extraordinary. You like the applied sciences. You've always liked them. In Wiltshire, the farmer whose orchard it was had a small library, and you were allowed to borrow from it, and you read anything that explained how things worked, how machines worked, how the world was organized underneath its surface appearances. This is another thing that doesn't appear in the parliamentary reports, the inner life of the women in the statistics. The woman who reads about scientific exhibitions in a folded newspaper on Christmas night in a cold room in Seven Dials. The mind that exists alongside the economics, that is not reducible to the economics. That is doing its own work in the margins of survival. January is hard. January is when the Christmas money runs out and the cold gets serious and the streets are quieter, because the expansiveness of December, has contracted back into ordinary life, and ordinary life is tighter than Christmas. January is when the women who are in bad straits are visibly in worse straits, when the arithmetic becomes crueler for everyone, when the cluster of women at the worst end of the hierarchy grows slightly larger as a few more of the middle-tier women slip in that direction. You don't slip. You hold your position. It costs effort, the particular effort of constant vigilance, but you hold. By the end of January, the cloth purse has 2 shillings and 7 pence. Growth, but slow. Growth is growth. February brings news of Agnes. Agnes came to find you on a Tuesday evening in February, and she was transformed. Not dramatically, not outwardly. She was wearing the same dress and the same bonnet, but she had a quality of settled energy that was different from her usual oscillating uncertainty. "We were married," she says, "on the 14th. Valentine's Day." "He knows." "You mean he knows about the street?" "He knows." She's calm about it. "We talked. He'd heard things, asked me directly. I told him." She's quiet for a moment. "He said it didn't matter to him what I'd had to do to survive. He said, 'I'm asking about who you are, not what you've done.'" You feel something in your chest that isn't quite envy. It's something more complicated, something that acknowledges that what Agnes has found is real, and that its reality doesn't diminish your situation or hers, that both things are true at once. "I'm glad," you say, and you mean it. Agnes takes your hand for a moment, squeezes it. "It gets easier," she says. And she means something different by it than you usually mean, not the daily management of difficulty, but the longer arc of things. She leaves. You stand at your corner in the February cold. 18 months now since you left Wiltshire. 14 on the Haymarket. The cloth purse has 2 shillings and 7 pence. Agnes is married. Mary Flynn's spine is worse. Catherine you haven't heard about in 8 months. The street continues. It always continues. The street has been here longer than any of you, and it will be here after all of you in some form, serving some version of the same function, because cities are like that, because the things cities need they keep finding ways to have, and the women who provide those things keep needing the money that pays the rent on the cold rooms in 7 Dials. But you have 2 shillings and 7 pence in a cloth purse, and Alice says that £3 is a lifeboat, and a lifeboat is built from shillings accumulated one at a time. Let's take one more evening, not a dramatic evening, not an evening when something unusual happens, an ordinary evening in March, when the weather is turning slightly warmer, when there's a suggestion of softness in the air that won't become spring for another 6 weeks, but that promises it. You're on your corner at 8:30. The street sounds like itself. The gas lamps cast their familiar yellow light. Somewhere down toward Piccadilly, a barrel organ is playing something that you almost recognise. A client comes. A conversation. A shilling earned. Another hour. Another man. 1 shilling and 6 pence this time, because you've gotten better at this. Better at reading what a situation will bear. Better at holding your price. Better at the small, confident movements that say, "I know my worth and I'm not negotiating downward." 2 and 6 pence for 2 transactions. On a March evening. You stand there a while longer, watching the street, the cabs and the couples and the vendors wrapping up for the night. The barrel organ has moved on somewhere. The air has a faint smell of something growing, something impossible and out of place in this particular corner of London, something that might be a window box somewhere above the shops, the first spring bulbs trying to happen in the city's impossibly compromised soil. You go home at midnight. You count the evening's money. You add 6 pence to the cloth purse. The purse now contains 3 shillings and 3 pence, not £3, but more than last month, more than last week. The arc is in the right direction. Slow, inconsistent, subject to the random interruptions that life keeps providing, but in the right direction. You hang the green taffeta dress on its hook behind the door, you wash your face in the cold water, you get into bed. Outside, London does what London always does, which is continue. It doesn't rest for you. It doesn't adjust its rhythms to your needs or your sleep schedule. 3 million people in a few square miles, all of them needing things, all of them trying to get them, the whole enormous system running at full speed through the night. And somewhere in all of that, in the cold room in 7 Dials, you are Eliza Marsh, 19 years old and now 20, from Wiltshire, in London for 18 months now, with 3 shillings and 3 pence in a cloth purse and the outline of a plan. You're tired. The particular tiredness of a body that has been cold and standing and performing and managing for too long. But it's the tiredness of someone who's been doing something, not the tiredness of someone to whom things have been done. There's a difference. You know the difference. The sounds of the city fade as sleep pulls you down. Or they don't fade, because the city doesn't actually get quieter. But you stop processing them, which amounts to the same thing. The barrel organ that moved on earlier has moved on again, somewhere further, its sound thinning and stretching across the distance until it becomes part of the general murmur. Your feet are still slightly cold. Your lower back aches the specific ache of hours standing. Your hands have the faint roughness that comes from cold and water and the general attrition of this life. You close your eyes. What you're carrying into sleep, the arithmetic. Always the arithmetic. 7 shillings and 6 pence and where it comes from and where it goes. The 17 pence that became 2 shillings and 7 that became 3 shillings and 3. The arc. The direction. What you're also carrying, the smell of the lavender. The clergyman with his notebook and his question. Agnes with her printer's assistant and her Valentine's Day wedding. The girl with the carpet bag who you sent to the shelter in Drury Lane. The view from Waterloo Bridge. The dome of St. Paul's above the northern skyline. The city spreading in every direction. The woman called Margaret who said, "If you're still yourself after the first year, you've got a chance. You're still yourself. More or less. It's a more than less most days." The room is cold, and the cloth purse is real, and the plan is real, and outside the city continues, and inside the room, the cold does what cold does, which is settle and wait. There will be other weeks, other corners. The green taffeta will eventually wear out and need replacing. The boots will need replacing before that. The arithmetic will require renegotiation, as it always does. Mrs. Hannigan will raise the rent in autumn, she always does, and you will either find the extra shilling or find a different room. But that's then. That's a calculation for another evening. Right now, in this moment, in this cold room, in this city that has been here since before memory, in this century that is moving faster than any century before it, in this particular dark hour of a March night. You have earned your rest. You have paid for the cold room and put 6 pence in the cloth purse and stood on the corner in the cold and done the arithmetic and kept the window open. You've earned this. Take it. Centuries will pass. London will change beyond all recognition. The streets you walk will be paved and widened and lit by electricity. The Haymarket will become something else, many things, in sequence. None of them exactly what it was in 1862. The cloth purse will be gone, and Mrs. Hannigan, and the Continental on Panton Street, and the barrel organ, and the smell of horse dung and coal smoke. But the arithmetic will be understood, because people across the decades will keep doing the work of understanding what it costs to be poor in a rich city. They'll keep asking the questions the clergyman asked. What do you actually need? What would actually make the difference? The answers won't change as much as the city does. The answers are still cold rooms and thin boots, and the gap between what you earn and what you need, and the small fierce act of saving sixpence a week in the direction of something better. Someone will read this account in some future that looks nothing like this room, in a warmth and comfort that you would find incomprehensible and probably wonderful, and they'll understand something they didn't understand before about the texture of a life lived in the narrow margin between survival and not. That's enough. That matters. The understanding that travels forward. You've been Eliza Marsh for this hour, and that was real. The cold was real. The cloth purse was real. The warped mirror and the sound of the city and the smell of the lavender, all of it real. The 7 shillings and 6pence, most of which was spent before it was earned, and the 6pence that wasn't, the 6pence saved. Real. Now let go of the arithmetic. Let it dissolve back into the general murmur of the city. Let the calculations quiet. Let the cold room become just a room. Let the green taffeta dress on its hook behind the door become just a dress, just fabric, just a colour in the dark. Let your hands unclench. Let your feet go. Let the weight of the evening standing come out of your lower back and dissolve into the mattress, the straw mattress that seemed uncomfortable once and doesn't seem like anything anymore. Just rest. Just the ground beneath you. The city breathes outside the window. It has been breathing for 2,000 years. It knows how to do this without your attention. Let it do it without your attention. Let the thoughts slow. The small thoughts, the large ones, the 6pence and the £3 and Agnes and the barrel organ and the arc of things moving in the right direction, even if slowly. Let them slow and soften and eventually stop. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have the arc, you have the direction, you have the window. That's more than nothing. That's enough for tonight. Good night.